day, all of you. I hope you're able to hear me through this remote microphone. Luckily enough, you were referring to me as having a passion for trees, whereas in here it says having an obsession with trees. It's a small difference. But still, yeah, it's more a passion, I must say. And that deals with the fact that I grew up in the east of Holland, in the forest. So I think the first 18 years of your life are extremely important to understand what it is about, living city, urban life, nature, and also sustainability. So we should start as early as possible to explain to young people and to train young people how to behave. I think it's very, very much about behavior and about awareness, and that's what we try to achieve in our buildings. Foremost, it's about awareness and behavior, because in technique and things like that, it changes quite quickly, quite fast. To get used to the system a little bit. Yeah, our office, we're about 44 in our office. I just explained to a few people, probably we will end up with 15 people at the end of this year. You all know why. But what we try to do is to keep working on projects in very different scales, urban and rural, in Holland and abroad. So we try to have our scope as broad as possible. That is because in Holland it's easy to start as a young architect, as a housing architect. And the first things we did was, I think I shouldn't walk because then the camera is moving all the time. We try to emphasize immediately architecture of this housing project and not the housing itself, because that really makes you become an expert in housing. I think I'm not an expert, not at all. I'm an amateur. I try to just make new things, try to look for new approaches and experiment with that. And since we as architects always experiment with unique objects, our work is never finished. We cannot, like with a car or a door or a light fixture or whatever, multiply that easily. And that makes our profession very unique in that sense. And that's what we like. About sustainability, it started about 10, 15 years ago with very simple technique, about new techniques, about keeping the warmth in and try to ventilate in a different system and regain energy. And that is one of the first things we did in the small project in the east of Holland for a nature preservation society. 95% of the buildings we make are on sites that were already built, as this project as well. Here there was an old farmhouse that burned down, and we had to rebuild that farmhouse that was already a restaurant. And we said, well, let's not rebuild a farmhouse if you're a nature preservation society, but let's explain that with modern architecture, with new approaches of architecture and technique, you can also save a lot of energy. So we tried to make a pavilion that saves about 40% of normal energy consumption for a restaurant. And to be honest, the technique in this pavilion, only 10 years old, is still is already abandoned. It has changed completely. Also facades, window framing, it has moved to a completely different approach, but at least for us it was the first possibility of experimenting with sustainable and more environmental approach of building, which is in a way a highly unsustainable building, we think. The best way would not build, but that in a sense is not possible in this world. In this project you will see a few simple approaches of regaining heat through regenerative heat wheels, to open up the pavilion as much as possible, as long as the temperature outside permits you to do so, and therefore not use ventilation systems and all these equipments at all. We reused water, so all the water from the roof is put into septic to tanks and then used for toilets, etc. So these were some very simple systems of bringing down the energy consumption of this project. But for me, more important was to make people and, let's say, the main public aware of the fact that new architecture and architecture in general can do something about the environment. And therefore we also used very popular elements, like literally embracing a tree, or using natural elements like oak trunks and real stones for supportive elements, and making a ceiling of leaves, so to approach the ceiling in a different way, or the floor as a series of cut trees. And that all together brought us to, maybe it's a bit too loud now. Could you turn down, or is it okay for you? Yeah, okay. So to approach a building in such a way that a youngster, my aunt or my grandmother, would immediately understand and love and sort of like it in a certain way. So a very popular way of architecture, and therefore changing the idea. And two elements that we did, this is an Ice Age landscape. It was pushed up in the last Ice Age. So we used these huge rocks from Norway, Denmark, Germany, coming to Holland. We used these huge rocks, and we put all the technique in the rocks. We put also the water over the rocks inside to show where water goes and comes from. And these elements we try to bring that to the main public. One of the main issues for us, at least in Holland, is reusing existing buildings. About 50% of the projects we do is reusing buildings, existing structures, and then we try to take it very literal. We keep it, we really keep it, and use it in a way that we have to change it as minimal as possible. For example, on the site of the fireworks explosion in Enschede, that was in 2001, a huge explosion, 400 houses were destroyed, lots of people killed, and there was a direct need for changing that area in Enschede, in the east of Holland. And one of the changes was that they wanted to bring 3 musea from the town of Enschede together into one new museum. That was cost efficient, and that change we did into an existing building that was in fact not so historically or monumentally, it was not very interesting. But we thought, at least let's keep it. Now so much is destroyed in the neighborhood. And the only thing we added, we kept all the walls that were still standing. We kept the ceilings by just restoring little pieces instead of completely taking it out as the contractor wanted. And the only thing we added was a museum tower where all the new offices were brought together. And since the complex was not suited for, let's say, the streams, the flows of public, we had to invent underground passages and bridges to make a sort of constant flow of public without changing the complex too much. And at the same time, we try to densify it by saying you have to use it as efficient as possible. So we added wherever possible housing in that project, in between the musea, on top of the museum, wherever possible, we put in a house, an apartment. So although it's an existing site, an existing building, and the let's say the perimeter was completely old, so you don't see very clearly that there is a new building, a new museum. By making this one little tower from far distant, you're able to understand that there is something new about it. And here you see how to reuse walls, sometimes really attaching to it, sometimes just using it as a second screen or as a fence, and therefore not making a new fence.